Tonight on Talking Politics, I'll talk to State Rep Mike Connolly, who's facing expulsion from the Boston chapter of Democratic Socialists of America. Then we'll dig into the multiple charges facing Boston City Councilor Kendra Lara after a car crash in JP last week, and look at how the City Council is responding. But first, as they often do, the Supreme Court closed out their latest session with the most controversial cases on their docket, sending down decisions that gutted affirmative action, allowed a web designer to refuse to create wedding websites for same-sex couples, and blocked President Biden's plan to cancel billions of dollars in student loan debt. Just a few days before those rulings came down, hundreds marched across Washington to protest a ruling the court made last year, overturning Roe v. Wade and the federal right to access abortion. In last year's midterms, nearly a quarter of voters told the AP that decision was, quote, the single most important factor in their vote. Now, as we inch closer and closer to the 2024 election, how could all these rulings affect the upcoming presidential race? I'm joined by UMass Amherst Poll Director Tatishe Nteta and Jesse Mermell, the founder and president of deWit Impact. Thank you both for being here. Tatishe, let's start with affirmative action, since Harvard was involved in that case and since Massachusetts is such a hotbed of higher ed. You polled on attitudes around affirmative action before that ruling came down. What were the big takeaways that you and your colleagues came up with?
Yeah, I think it's in line with polling that we've seen over the course of the last decade. Americans are in some ways ambivalent as it pertains to affirmative action. We found a plurality of Americans oppose affirmative action, and the specific questioning was really looking at whether or not colleges should take into account race or ethnicity on the admissions process, alongside things like GPA, letters of recommendation, as well as test scores. And we found about 40% of Americans oppose this. But I say ambivalent because on the other side, you have a number of Americans that don't have an opinion and a number of Americans that support the policy. So it's not majoritarian in terms of the distribution of opposition. But at the same time, you see more Americans opposing affirmative action, and that's in line with much of the polling that we've seen from other polling firms.
Just to drive home the numbers that you're talking about, we have a couple of graphics. First, as you said, 42% of people in your poll conducted in late May and early June opposed the use of or consideration of race and ethnicity in addition to other factors. 33% supported it. And one finding that struck me was that even among the strongest supporters of affirmative action, the support was pretty weak. Among Black and African American respondents, just 52% said they supported the consideration of race and ethnicity in higher ed admissions. 51% of self-identified liberals, 51% of people with postgraduate degrees. Am I right to be surprised by that relatively soft support, even in those groups, Tatishe?
In some ways, no. Affirmative action is not a very popular policy, and our polling demonstrates this. So across various demographic groups, whether you look at age, whether you look at gender identity, class, education level, you find very little support, majoritarian support for this policy. And this is, again, in line with polling that you see at Pew, at Gallup, that affirmative action is not necessarily, at least in 2023, an extremely popular policy outside of core Democratic constituencies.
So Jesse Mermell, when I look at the numbers that we've been talking through with Tatishe, my immediate conclusion is, okay, this is not a ruling that is going to boost Democrats in 2024 the way the Dobbs ruling did in the last election cycle. Am I right, or am I being too simplistic?
Respectfully, I think you're being too simplistic.
Lay it on me. I want to hear why.
Because this ruling doesn't exist in a vacuum. This ruling exists in the context of Dobbs, which is disproportionately impacting people of color. This ruling exists in the context of, which I know we'll talk about, the student debt ruling, which very significantly disproportionately impacts people of color and is obviously tied to who gets to pursue higher education, given the affirmative action study, and affirmative action ruling, and exists in the context of the LGBTQ plus discrimination ruling that happened. All of these things are going to be talked about together on the campaign trail between now and next November, and I think that cumulative story is going to be incredibly motivating. Dobbs and Roe, in and of itself, we've already seen has been driving voters to the polls. This, I think, together will increase voter turnout exponentially.
All right, let's kick around this idea that you've just voted, that there's a bigger narrative that's waiting to be crafted that will be powerful. You mentioned the ruling on business owners being allowed to deny services to LGBTQ customers if, in fact, providing those services would violate their personal beliefs in some way. There was a Pew poll conducted on that, again, before the ruling came down. I want to bring up those numbers. 60% of people polled by Pew in late March and early April said that business owners should be able to refuse to provide services to LGBTQ customers over objections they might have, and only 38% said they shouldn't. Again, I don't want to sound overly naive talking about these findings in terms of surprise or lack of surprise, but I was struck by that because that suggests to me that at least in that ruling, the court came down on the side of public opinion in much the same way, maybe even more so than they did with affirmative action. So when you talk about creating a coherent narrative that ties these things together, isn't that tough to do if in more than one case the court is actually in step with what the public's thinking right now?
I don't think so, because what you're talking about is how folks feel on any given day. What I'm talking about is how pumped are you on election day? To go out there and vote, to stand in the rain, to wait in long lines, and in the weeks beforehand to donate, to phone bank, to hit the doors and work. I think this still matters in a huge, huge way. I think the collective story matters. And I think that, as we already heard, this is about those core Democratic voters. Core Democratic voters understand that popular opinion shouldn't dictate rights. And when the court has pushed in favor of advancing people's rights, we have seen overwhelming support and joy from people. And to see the court rolling that back is not just disheartening on a personal level, it is going to be hugely motivating to multiple categories of voters next fall. The Democrats just have to tell the story and turn people out.
Tatishe, my recollection is that you and your UMass colleagues, you did not poll recently on President Biden's debt relief plan. Am I right about that? If I'm wrong, tell me, because I don't want to miss it. Okay.
No, we haven't. We polled about a year ago on that plan. And again, there was relative ambivalence on that plan.
Okay, so that puts you, again, in step with other pollsters who found, it seems to me like, just based on my cursory research, kind of an even split. Maybe more people in some recent polling in favor of the president's plan that was tossed out by the court, but pretty close, about half and half. Do you buy Jesse's idea that core Democratic constituencies can be activated in some of these rulings that we're discussing, especially if they're tied together, even if public opinion, broadly speaking, might suggest that these aren't taken individually winners for the Democratic Party? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think the issue here is that, the Supreme Court, now with the 6-3 conservative majority, is pushing through on policies that, a lot of Democrats have argued should be dealt with at the congressional level and the presidential level. So whether or not you protect LGBTQ rights, questions regarding affirmative action, these aren't necessarily in the minds of, I think, a lot of Democratic constituencies, issues that should be dealt with by the high court, but should be dealt with more at the legislative level. And I think making the claim that the court itself is increasingly becoming a policymaking institution and something should be done about the court is going to mobilize not just core Democratic constituencies, but I think a lot of Americans are increasingly concerned about what role the court is playing in our political institutions, in our politics more generally. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be mobilizing, not just for core Democratic constituencies, but for large swaths of Americans.
Jesse, yeah, I saw you nodding as Tatishe was making that point.
Yeah, well, two things. One, I totally agree with Tatishe that the idea that we have to do something about the court is very much picking up steam. I mean, you're seeing the movement to expand the court really develop momentum that it hasn't had in recent years. With all due respect to Tatishe and to pollsters, I think back to what those of us in the reproductive health and abortion rights movement have been saying for years about how strongly voters feel about abortion rights. And we were, how should I put this generally, ignored, mocked, completely pushed aside. It turns out we were right. We're hearing from Black and brown voters and activists on the ground, from LGBTQ plus activists, from student leaders, how angry they are, how motivated they are. And with all due respect to pollsters and data, which is a huge piece of this puzzle, I think we need to learn a lesson from Roe and Dobbs and listen to the activists on the ground and understand how central this is going to be to turning people out next November.
Tatishe, I got to give you a chance to weigh in there since Jesse suggested that the polling establishment, broadly speaking, she wasn't actually, I didn't see her point a finger in your direction, but that pollsters didn't quite pick up on how animating the issue of abortion rights was going to be to a lot of voters.
Not just pollsters. I'll throw an elbow at you. The media as well, right? The chattering classes. No one
now you've
understood.
gone too far.
I know.
We're gonna scratch this. Like, no, I'm just kidding.
No, but the entire chattering class didn't understand what Roe meant.
Tatishe, do you think she's got a point there? Love to hear your take.
I don't know if that's the case. If we look at the last election, as you sort of moved closer to election day, we saw voters, particularly core Democratic constituencies, young people, liberals, urban voters, all pointing to questions regarding democracy. Democracy is under threat, but also abortion as one of the sort of central mobilizing factors. If you look at Gallup polling over time, we're seeing close to 7 in 10 Americans supporting abortion rights, and in particular, legalizing abortions in the first trimester. So I think polling's in some ways in lockstep with where the movement regarding the creation, or at least the protection of abortion rights is. And as we get closer to 2024, I think we're going to see abortion becoming one of the central issues, mobilizing people to vote, and one of the central issues defining the Republican and Democratic candidates for president and across the ballot.
This is exactly the note I wanted to end on. I want to give you the last word here, Jesse, but first, before I do, I want to pull up some more findings. This is from an NBC News poll taken in June around the one-year anniversary of the Dobbs ruling, and it showed incredibly strong disapproval across a number of groups for the court's ruling in Dobbs. 61% disapproved of it, 36% only approved. And one thing that really struck me, in contrast with some of what we were talking about earlier, is how strong the disapproval was in group after group after group. 55% of men disapproved of Dobbs, 67% of women, 77% of younger women ages 18 to 49, 78% of black voters, 70% of Latino voters, and 60% of independents. So I guess my closing question for you, Jesse, is do you trust President Biden, who sometimes has been somewhat lukewarm in his formulations of his support for abortion rights, do you trust him to take the message that that poll delivers and that Tatishe was talking about, to take it out on the campaign trail and use it to win?
I do, and I'll tell you why. It's because listen, there's no question that President Biden has moved on this issue. He said the other day that he is not necessarily, he doesn't love talking about abortion policy. I wish that he were more comfortable with it. I praise him for the movement that he's made. I wish he was more comfortable. That said, Vice President Kamala Harris has been a champion on this for decades, has been an incredibly vocal leader in the past few years, in the past 13 months since Dobbs in particular. And I know that the president is surrounded by leaders and advisors who very much understand this. So I trust that not just President Biden, but the vice president and the entire Democratic establishment will be out there in every single state, campaigning on abortion rights and on the other issues that we just talked about.
All right, we'll have to watch and have you come back and talk about what they're doing or not doing. Jesse Mermell, Tatishe Nteta, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, if there's a hot-button issue brewing at the State House, like rent control or tax cuts, you can generally expect State Rep Mike Connolly of Cambridge to be staking out a position to the left of most of his colleagues. In fact, after the 2021-2022 legislative session wrapped up, Connolly was one of just 3 state reps singled out as exemplary by the group Progressive Mass, which gave him an A+ 100% rating for those years. But now Connolly is facing possible expulsion by the Boston Democratic Socialists of America for, among other things, endorsing Maura Healey for governor, twice supporting Ron Mariano for House Speaker, and deviating from the DSA's national platform on housing. A vote by the Boston DSA on Connolly's proposed expulsion is scheduled for Sunday, July 23rd. And Mike Connolly joins me now. Rep. Connolly, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Before we talk about the current situation that you are in, I want to ask you, why did you become a member of the DSA to begin with? And what does being part of that group mean to you? What does it mean to you?
I became a part of the group because I believe we need to transform society. We have overlapping emergencies right now that we are facing, whether that's the ongoing housing emergency, the opioid epidemic, where we saw more deaths last year than any year before, tragically. The ongoing climate crisis that gets scarier by the day. The MBTA disaster that I'm very engaged in addressing. And I believe that the way we address these ongoing emergencies is to organize, is to do activism, is to bring people together, and is to fight for systemic change. And I certainly believe democratic socialism is an important way that we can get there.
One of the, as we mentioned in the intro, one of the briefs against you brought by the Boston DSA is that you endorsed Maura Healey for governor in the last election cycle. You endorsed her about 3 weeks before Sonia Chang Diaz, who was running to Healey's left and, like you just said, advocating for a big systemic change, about 3 weeks before she ended her campaign. To what extent do you think that this expulsion vote that you're facing is a product of that Healey endorsement, which you made at the time you did?
You know, it appears that some members of DSA are very upset about that endorsement. I think, to be fair, you know, DSA isn't a monolith, and this petition to expel me from the organization is coming from one subset of members. Many of them do happen to be in the current leadership, although I will say throughout this week I've been getting an overwhelming number of messages from people in DSA, all of my constituents, people across government, saying we support what you do, we appreciate you. So it's actually felt really nice to get that affirmation. But to your question, I support Governor Healey. I think she is an extraordinary leader for our Commonwealth. And as a progressive and as a democratic socialist, there may be some parts of some issues where we disagree. And I'm proud to go to Beacon Hill and stand up and make the case for where progressives or socialists may disagree on certain issues, while at the same time keeping in mind how much we agree on and how much work we really have to do for my district and for this entire state.
As I hear you talk about this, tell me if I've got this right. I've been trying to wrap my brain around this back and forth that you're in the midst of, and my sense is that you like the idea of transforming society and politics at some fundamental level, but you also believe that it's necessary to work within those systems as they currently exist to move in that direction. And my sense from the public statements made by your detractors, and we asked them for additional comment, they have said that they're not providing it for the time being, they're letting their previous public comments stand on their own, that they are less amenable to the idea of working within existing systems in an attempt to transform them. From your vantage point, is that a fair characterization of what's going on here?
You know, I think generally, obviously we could get into the nuances for hours, but I think we have to remember Democratic Socialists make up 1% of the Massachusetts state legislature. I'm proud to be one of the few DSA members on Beacon Hill, and I recognize we need to work with others in government to deliver for our communities.
The other state rep who I believe is a DSA member is Eric Eiderhoven, right? Rep Eiderhoven.
Yes.
We've had on the show a few times. Is there anyone else who I'm missing in the legislative firmament, or is it just you and Rep Eiderhoven?
That would be my understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
Has she weighed in on this episode as it's unfolded, either to come to your defense or to agree with the people who are concerned about positions that you've taken?
I mean, we've spoken personally. I'm not sure if she's made a public statement yet.
Okay. Do you expect that she will, or do you not have a sense of that?
I don't have a sense of it.
Okay. Another gripe, and if you want to tackle any other criticisms that were made publicly of you, I'm happy to have you do that. But one thing that I found interesting is that you were accused of, I think, being too willing to see landlords as a part, at least some landlords, as a part of the push to control rent in Massachusetts. You've been a big proponent of rent control or rent stabilization, but the statement from Boston DSA said that I think you, for example, were working with a group called, don't want to get it wrong, Landlords for Affordable Housing,
yes,
or something to that effect. Is that part of it, that because DSA sees capitalism as inherently exploitative, for some DSA purists, you shouldn't work with landlords at all because to be a landlord is, from their vantage point, just beyond the pale and not something anyone should be?
You know, I think that apparently is the critique, but, you know, I'll say, you know, so there is this group that's emerging. It's called Landlords for Affordable Housing. One of my constituents is organizing it, and I think this is incredibly strategic because the truth is, all over my district and all over the Commonwealth, many, many landlords support affordable housing. Many landlords support reasonable rent control. And so if you're thinking strategically, how do we win rent control for Cambridge, for Somerville, for Boston, for cities that are interested in it, I want the debate to be all of us as a society calling for housing justice and maybe a few voices in the real estate industry pushing back against us. And I think that's better. I think it would be better for us to say we have landlords who support this and landlords who don't support this. So, you know, we want to avoid walking ourselves into an us versus them situation, and we want to seek common ground wherever we can find it. And so I embrace the fact that many landlords will support rent control, and we want their voices in this discussion.
It's probably worth noting, as many viewers will know, that right now rent control's prospects on Beacon Hill looks to be an uphill climb to get local control or local permission to implement rent control to make that a reality. So there's a ways to go.
Sure, yeah, and I would say if it looks like an uphill climb, it's because we need to come together. One of the charges I'm facing is supporting Mayor Michelle Wu's rent stabilization efforts, and I think she's done an extraordinary job building consensus on the Boston City Council, and I think what we need to do is unite everyone who supports ideas like rent control and work together to advance the issue. And if we fail to do that, then we'll keep hearing that the issue is dead on Beacon Hill.
All right, Rep. Mike Connolly, thank you for coming in to talk this through. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Finally tonight, yet another controversy coming out of the Boston City Council. Kendra Lara is now facing charges after crashing a car into a house in Jamaica Plain last week. The councilor was reportedly driving with a revoked license in an unregistered, uninsured car with an expired inspection sticker. Police also filed a report to the Department of Children and Families because Lara's 7-year-old son, who was riding with her and ended up with a cut on his head, was not in a booster seat. Boston City Council President Ed Flynn called the details of the case troubling in an open letter. In that same letter, he also called out Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, who recently admitted to violating laws by representing his brother in a sexual harassment lawsuit after he joined the City Council. Arroyo has also faced scrutiny over his campaign's relationship with former U.S. Attorney Rachel Rollins, who allegedly used her influence to try to help Arroyo win the 2022 Suffolk County DA's race. All of this comes in an extremely tense and fraught era for the council. Joining me to help break it all down is Boston Herald reporter Chris Van Buskirk. Chris, thank you for being here, and kudos on your reporting, which seems to have driven this story. I've been learning a lot of things from you first before I have seen them elsewhere. Can you start, because this did happen in a holiday week when I've been paying attention, others in the media have been paying attention in politics, but some ordinary people may not have been. Can you recap this accident that Kendra Lara was involved in?
Sure, absolutely, Adam. Thanks for having me. Friday comes around afternoon, and police report says that Councilor Lara was driving that unregistered vehicle with a revoked license. They complain, traveling down Center Street when she swerves to avoid a car that she says was parked along the side of the road and was pulling out. She takes that left turn straight into a house, causing damage to the front porch. The driver of that second vehicle has a different narrative. The councilor was traveling at a high rate of speed. That driver says he made no intention to pull out, and that the councilor passed him and swerved left. And
the damage was pretty substantial, right?
The damage was pretty substantial. The front porch, the railing was down. The front railing in front of the house was also down. I was there on Saturday afternoon, the day after the accident. It appeared they had done a little bit of repair work at that point.
All right, so what is the extent of her legal jeopardy at this point?
Right, she's facing 3 charges for the unregistered, uninsured car and driving with a revoked license. She's going to be in West Roxbury Court, but we still don't know when that date's coming up. Maybe earliest, maybe next week.
And do we know, in fact, why her license was revoked to begin with?
Right, and we looked at her driving record, just try to find out, but some details are still missing. It appears that she has multiple sanctions and violations in Connecticut. It looks like she failed to miss a court date or a trial down there, but really, details are scarce on that.
Okay, what has the councilor herself and what have her allies been saying as this accident and the attendant circumstances have made headlines? What have they had to say on her behalf?
Right. I did get a response from her office, from her chief of staff on Friday, just really outlining the crash was a scary situation, but the counselor's okay, and the counselor asked for privacy.
And has anyone, I think of her as at a time when the counselor is forgive me, the council itself is split into some warring blocs to some extent, although not entirely on racial lines, but between conservatives on the one hand and progressives on the other, and there's some people in the middle. Have any of her critics, besides Ed Flynn, who we mentioned a moment ago, have they been weighing in?
You know, that's a good question. I haven't had a chance to catch up on that, Adam, but I'm sure that there have been some comments in that direction.
Okay, I wanted just to flesh out a little bit what we've heard from Ed Flynn, the city council president. We quoted from his open letter a moment ago. He also talked with one of our colleagues here at GBH News, Xavier Cullen. Let's take a look at a little bit of what Flynn had to say in that conversation.
What I want to do is stress to my colleagues and to the residents that our behavior has to change.
I feel like I should contextualize here. Flynn is making those comments on the heels of Lara calling out seemingly him and a couple other colleagues, though not by name, for the way they described a death at a Boston housing project, South Boston housing project recently. She accused them of discussing that death in a homophobic and transphobic manner, basically being overly incendiary. So that, again, just points up, I think, the degree to which the council is largely at war with itself right now. Chris, I know that you are not a Boston City Council specialist, but you're an informed political observer. If you had to predict, is this likely, the Lara accident coming on the heels of everything else we've been talking about, do you expect that it's going to continue to ratchet up internal tensions in a way that we might see spilling out the next time the council gets together?
Yeah, I have to imagine that the public, barbs are going to continue, and certainly, with election coming up, like all of this has got to, it's going to continue rationing. Yeah.
All right, Chris Van Buskirk, thank you for being here, and look forward to seeing what you do next on the story.
Thanks. Thanks, Adam.
That's it for tonight, but do come back next week and please tell us what you think. The email's talkingpolitics@wgbh.org. The website's gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics, or you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Reilly Adam. For now, thank you for watching and good night.
Next time on Stories from the